start with your first moment of politicization. What actually got you into politics?
Well, I often say that I'm an accidental tourist in politics, that I was sort of already in politics before I realized it, in that I think that there were a couple of moments. I know when I worked through the doctor's strike and CTV TV showed up in my office, and I realized that maybe that was a moment of political action or statement. But the main thing was the fight for Women's College Hospital, that I had I trained and was born and everything at the Wellesley, and I was a convert over to Women's College, and so I thought it was a very special place because I'd come from outside, and that the things that we were taking for granted at Women's, like patients being a full partner in their care, doctor to interdisciplinary care, hospital to community care, I felt were going to be put at risk if we ended up with this shotgun marriage to the Toronto General. And so the board had sort of taken this decision without talking to any of us, and we didn't really know what problem they were trying to solve. And I just raised a whole bunch of money for them with the Phantom of the Opera galas. And so I showed up at the board meeting and I said, all the people that helped me raise this money are going to help me stop this stupid merger. And I ended up later sort of with a small posse being able to stop the merger. So we ended up having the board resign. We ended up putting in place our own board. Mm-hmm. And but mainly it was getting to know some of the people that ended up my best friends in life. Because when you're fighting for things, so Doris Anderson showed up as a patient and then wrote a column in the Toronto Star that turned our whole campaign around, and meeting with people at City Hall, meeting at Queen's Park, doing media, I all of a sudden realized I was doing politics. So when somebody came and asked me to run 2 years later, and I say, oh, I know nothing about politics, they said, well, no, that's why we came to get you. Like, and so, you know, most times women, I think, have never even thought of it, of running, until somebody puts the idea in your head. And I guess it's I wasn't born in red diapers. I didn't belong to a political party until I actually was asked to run. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, you know, quite often when I'm sitting, like on Friday at North Toronto Collegiate with the 400 and some odd grade 10s, or in the little grade 5 classrooms, that you have to let them know that when I was their age, I had no idea I'd ever do politics. Right.
That sounds like it was an accidental thing, in that you really cared enough about this one thing to realize that you cared enough about your community to fight for it in all different manners. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that what I find when I do my Women in Politics days, in that, you know, we do 3 panels. We do the women who've run, or like sort of Barbara Hall, or the, you know, Kathleen Wynne, we Marilyn Shirley. We bring people from hopefully all parties, that activists who've chosen not to run, like Equal Voice and the Native Women's Association, and then a media panel. That when you talk to the women that have run, most of them, there was something that really bugged them. And, you know, Eleanor Kaplan, it was some kid almost got hit and she wanted a crosswalk opposite the school. Marilyn Shirley, I think it was lead in the soil. Kathleen Wynne, it was classroom size, I think, but also fighting against the megacity. So fighting for neighborhoods. So yeah, it really is just sort of feeling passionate about something and going and getting it done, and not really, it's sort of democracy, not politics, and this sort of idea that if you don't speak up, then somebody else is going to make the decisions on your behalf.
Yeah, if you don't speak up, nobody will for you. Yeah. And that's something I think about a lot as a writer. So it's interesting that it crosses all these different kind of career choices that women make, and seem to make in less numbers than men. But there's a lot to be commended for taking an opportunity when it comes to you. So anyway.
But I think your dad and you would know. I mean, the toughest thing is leaving something you love.
It's true. It's true. It's scary. Yeah.
You know, I remember tears rolling down my face as I was writing this letter to the patients, typing it out, going, yes, the rumor is true. You know, people are saying they're going to lose a good doctor. And I think my justification was, I think I have to go and do this in order for it to be possible to be a good doctor in Ontario, meaning that I needed to be where the decisions were being taken on behalf of my patients, my colleagues, whatever. And that I felt there needed to be a voice there. Yeah. Otherwise, the decisions were going to continue to be stupid. And so that was sort of how I justified it. I also found later that the job was pretty well the same, asking what's wrong, listening, together making a plan, and, you know, opening a chart, helping somebody through a system. But it was, I think, my passion about the democracy between elections came from this women's college germ of an idea that the patient knows their body best, the provider hopefully knows the system best, and together 2 and 2 makes 5. And so that's what I've been trying to figure out how we do in this democracy file, that as the elected representative and the citizen, how do we continue to do this 2 and 2 makes 5 business, which is the opportunity to have a democracy between elections, where citizens would be able to shape public policy, not just at the ballot box.
No, I'm very interested in that, and in different modes of more open governance where, you know, and I find actually that's one of the best things about you is that your comments, your responses are available online, coming directly from you, and it actually gives a sense anyway that that there's a person there. Like a lot of times you feel that it's a, you know, it's a somebody plastic who's just spouting what there ought to be, what they ought to say, and I never feel that way with you. Like it's coming from your heart, and it obviously, you know, what you do really means something to you personally. So I think there's a lot to be, there's a lot of inspiration there for women to feel that they can speak up and feel that they can become the person that they want to be.
I think that for 8 years I've been doing this Sunday night chat. It was on MSN and now on Facebook for an hour at 9 every Sunday night. And so even when I was minister...
Huge commission. That's a huge commitment too. Yeah.
The department was just appalled that I would go on without adult supervision, without whatever we call it, the sort of, you know, they used to call them the flying babies, you know, the people around the ministers who tell them what they're supposed to be doing and saying and all those things. And so every Sunday night I just sit at the computer and talk to everybody, and I was quite amazed at what I learned. Like during Katrina, you know, the kids online had way more interesting information than my department did. And, you know, whether it was the NPR radio station I should be listening to in New Orleans that was actually giving the real information, on the Copyright Act, even back then, they had really good ideas about the intent to distribute or those sorts of things. So I've always found that you can, well, like my patients, I had the best patients in the world, and I always learned from them that I think that this opportunity really just affords me a good idea. I mean, I can remember one day, yet another kid had drowned, and I went on TV and said something like, every kid in Canada should know how to swim. And then my department went absolutely nuts, going, Dr. Bennett, you can't say that, and sort of, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, we're going to figure this out. And, you know, and eventually Gerard Kennedy, as an education minister, picked up the Life Saving Society Swim to Survive thing, and we started planning it across the provinces. But again, it's just, it does have to come from the heart, and you can't really, and I am worried. We were just saying that the idea that you would get elected to Parliament to suit up in some team jersey and spew the talking points that somebody's written somebody in the Prime Minister's office or something was never, and I don't think these elected representatives right now understand that that's not the way it's supposed to be.
I can't imagine staying inspired and committed to the process if you actually felt you had to do that rather than speak from the heart. But you do seem like a bit of an anomaly as a politician. So that's why you're here today, and we're so happy you are. Actually, I wanted to go back.
We want more anomalies.
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's...
We're out here recruiting anomalies.
I agree, and I think that that's, to me, also speaks to having more women in these positions who may not come through the same channels as the men who are there, and women of color, men of color, people from more diverse backgrounds across the country. Like, our country is so diverse, and our cabinet doesn't reflect that. So I'm hoping when it comes time for questions, there'll be questions from people here and online that speak to that directly. But I wanted to just back up to your first campaign. So you're a doctor, you've done these kind of community engagement, political actions around the hospitals, and now comes time to actually run a campaign. What do you say, if you could distill it to a lesson you learned in that very first campaign, what would it be?
Well, of course, I ended up with almost 2 campaigns rolled into one another. So I was running in a by-election that then got folded into the general election. So the week before the by-election, the general election was called, so they just ended up moving so I ended up with, probably would have won the by-election. And then this was 1995 with the big blue machine and the TV ads and all this, and oh my God, it was awful. As all these people that had been pretty nice to you and smiling, now shuffling by you at the subway stops, looking at their feet, sort of too embarrassed to say that they weren't voting for you anymore, or this doctor who wanted my sign taken off his lawn, and replaced. So you were going, oh my God, this isn't going well now. And I was running against Isabel Bassett, so that was a big deal about 2 good women, isn't it awful, blah, blah, blah. And you're going, well, they don't go 2 good men. It's like, it's sort of, so it's, but I think the surprising thing was that being smart and being able to read stuff and learn stuff that means absolutely nothing sometimes in a campaign. Because what your job really is to find out where your supporters are, half the campaign, and half the campaign is on election day getting them out to vote. Right. And so that you don't, I thought I ran around persuading people to vote for me, and it's not the case at all. You find out where your support is, and then the E-Day strategy to get them out to vote is huge.
Interesting.
So it's a humbling.
Yeah.
And you still take every single sign for a different person personally.
Right.
Like I want to, even driving along Chaplin, near my house, that every single sign that has a conservative sign or whatever, you want to go knock on the door and say, are you sure?
Really?
Sort of.
Well, I think the smear campaigns weren't as big back then either, or were they? Was that sort of right when they were beginning with the change in color?
Yeah, those were the first big TV negative ads, and they were.
It'd be terrifying, I have to say.
But when they're lying about quota, in terms of pay equity or quotas, or some of the and then you'd see these TV ads with the big blue down here and the big red down here, and everything that was under our column was incorrect. And you kept thinking, shouldn't we have an injunction or something? Because of course there's no truth in advertising laws in politics, and that seemed a bit upsetting.
A little bit, yeah. So, okay, now let's bring it up to the most recent campaign. What would you say was different for you after all these years and all this experience? So if you're comparing that first campaign to the most recent one, what have you learned over the years?
Well, again, things can change very fast. I mean, the last weekend there with the NDP surge was really quite surprising to all of us, and so it's always humbling. You can't count on anything in terms of what people will do when they get in the ballot box. Of course, now in campaigns, I have to spend a lot of time out of the riding, helping women, mainly women candidates across the country, and so I I think this campaign was surprising that it felt so much better on the ground than it ended up doing. So it seemed quite positive,
Right.
but you know, quite often in campaigns, you're only talking to, you're mainly talking to people who are your supporters or
Right.
potential supporters. Yeah.
So you're not quite sure what's going on outside of that.
Well, and of course, when you're outside the riding, you're in
Other territory.
Liberal campaign offices, doing rallies, doing those things, and so you've got quite a bizarre sense of reality.
And
as
how do
you're
you take
running
care
around
of
talking
yourself
to
while
your-
you're doing
Yeah.
that? Like I know as an author, just going on a book tour for 2 weeks is exhausting. I mean, it's exciting and I meet all these interesting people, but I'm wondering how you can do that all year long, essentially, and how you take care of yourself, what tricks you have for just keeping your own energy and inspiration up.
It was interesting that I think this time last year I was very worried about the women candidates who come on I do a call also for 8 years, every week for an hour. I talk to women candidates from across the country, and they were starting to use the word burnout because, of course, this perpetual campaign of a minority government was, some of them had been the candidate for 2 years, and it was really tough. And so I did my very best family doctor shtick for a little while, and then I thought, I'm a bit worried about this, and so I asked my friend Nora Spinks, who's now at the Vanier Institute, but did this work-life harmony, if she'd come on and do sort of telephone workshops with the women, and she had some really good tricks, and it was in terms of her developing personal policies, and that got like, I have a personal policy that I have dinner at home Sunday nights, and even if I don't do anything else, even if, in going from Ottawa to Quebec City, I came home to have dinner, Sunday night to cook dinner and be there and do my weekly chat and change whatever's in my suitcase and
feel centered again. Yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
And also, I mean, obviously, we're lucky enough to have a cottage that's close by, and that is my sort of spiritual center where I push reset and recharge and get to read and write, which you don't tend to have time to do otherwise. But
something else about the geography of this area, I find when I leave and come back, if I'm on tour, I appreciate it that much more, and it feels like home. But that's me. Okay, here's another question. How would you say female politicians, if you think this is true, how would you say female politicians are different from male politicians?
I think that sometimes it's the motivation for doing it in the first place, just as we've talked, that the women tend to come to want to make a difference. Some of the male politicians, and there are great men that have come to make a difference. One of the most loyal members of I chair the Women's Caucus is Irwin Cotler. He's one of the most amazing members of the Women's Caucus in terms of women's rights or human rights, and he comes and. But I think that if quite often some of the younger men have maybe been president of the student council, a member of the debating club, do a degree in political science, a staffer on the Hill, and then run for office, and it's all part of a team sport, as opposed to wanting to change things that just don't seem right, which is, I think, what the women do. I think Paul Martin used to always say that if you ask a woman to run, she will always go, well, I don't think I'm qualified, and is there somebody else that would be better? And where
that would be my feeling. I can imagine that.
But sometimes if you ask the men, they go, "What time should I be there? And do I need a tie?" Like it's sort of a.
I've been ready for this my whole life.
Your iPhone is just about to fall off.
Oh, thank you.
But it is something that secretly they've been thinking about in
or
the back
so
of their, or not so
secretly,
When
no,
you have
training
occasionally I have grade 7 kids want to come and see me who say, "I'd like to be prime minister," and you go, "Really?"
I think I did. That's in grade 7.
Oh, that's
I mean, who doesn't, really? But, you know, if you're in a family that's engaged and keeping in touch with what's going on and you want to change things, I think everybody dreams about that, girl or boy, so.
And speaking of girls, Idil is listening at home, and it's easier for her to listen if you guys have.
Speak into our mics, okay.
Really,
okay.
that's what they're for. You mean, yeah, okay.
And I really want to get to the part of the talk where you guys get to ask questions. So I only have a couple more. I don't know how we're doing with time. So I wanted to talk to you about your role as First Nations critics. As you know, I run a writing group for First Nations men at NAMERES. And so this is something that's very interesting to me. How did you get to take on this role, and why was it of interest to you?
Well, it's been one of the best parts about being a member of Parliament, getting to do things you would never get to do. So getting to the north, Nancy Cartek-Lindell was the member for Nunavut. We had a sort of Arctic caucus. And I started to become really interested in the north and this vastness that is Canada, right? And the people that live there and the people that were here first. When I was Minister of State for Public Health, we began to do some work, and then it became fashionable to talk about the social determinants of health. And obviously at Women's College, we were concerned about poverty and violence and housing and education, equity, all those things. So the First Nations file and Inuit Métis was, I think, to me this time was an area that still I felt that I could make the greatest difference. And the thing that, you know, I had been the health critic and I'd been a public health minister. I think I know tomorrow if somebody gave me the keys to Health Canada, and I'd know exactly what I want to do, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and knowing what the solution should be. On democratic renewal, I was that critic. I think I know what I would want to do. On the Indigenous file, it's so complex and there's so much to learn. I asked Bob Ray if I could do this file, and knowing that it's a file very close to his heart, I was thrilled that he let me do it. I think he was quite surprised that I was asking for it.
Did you grow up in Toronto? Where did you grow
I
up?
grew up in Toronto.
Yeah, so it's an interesting role that you've taken on there. And
what's so exciting, Emily, is that I have these amazing advisory people. So the Aboriginal Peoples Commission, you know, have great people like Glenn Wheeler and a whole bunch of people now working hard within the party. The past candidates.
So important.
You know,
I'm so happy to hear this.
We have two former premiers, Paul Click and Joe Handley, but Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo, who's done so much work as the professor at U of T. She was our candidate on Georgina Island, is doing this Roots Exchange with young people exchange. I mean, she's just amazing and comes with me whenever I can. And then we've got the Aboriginal senators who are also like Lillian Dick and the people. So it's not like I have to do this on my own. I've got all this support. And last 2 weeks ago, we had 250 people out in Guelph as we're trying to do these roundtables on Aboriginal studies, because I'm obsessed that we in Canada need to do what New Zealand did, which was they had and Bev Jacobs from the Native Women's Association said this at one of my Women in Politics days, that having Aboriginal studies, kindergarten to grade 8, and of course in Canada it's a little tough because of these things called provinces, but you can't sort of decide thou shalt have a curriculum K to 8. But in New Zealand they had age-appropriate Maori studies K to 8, and then optional in high school, and they've really turned it around such that Maori culture, history, art is part of the identity of every New Zealander, and I think that's, you know, what we're coming to understand is Aboriginal education is not just for Aboriginal people. It is for all of us.
I was fortunate enough in the past couple of years to work as an acquisitions editor for McGraw-Hill, who is an educational publisher, creating brand new textbooks. And for the first time, their mandate was actually, well, the first time that I know about in textbooks, English textbooks, to include Aboriginal voices, First Nation voices, in the right in the English curriculum. So I feel like it's happening, it's changing. It should also be happening in history class, and the Aboriginal Studies classes appearing in different regions are also part of that process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, at the Council Fire on Friday, as they're planning for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to be here in Toronto, May 31st, June 1st, 2nd, and they want way more people to, the churches and Kairos and all of the groups that were there planning it. We're talking about those textbooks, and I went to see them at that fabulous new bookstore at Six Nations, and I bought two and gave them to Paul Martin, who's been pushing so hard on this stuff. But it's great to finally see them, because.
And it has to start with consultations, which it seems like you're doing, which I also commend. I think that's the important thing, is finding out, not what people in the locus of power say is best for First Nations, Métis, Inuit people, but actually to hear and to implement those strategies, which is a lot like the concept of open governance for me. Like, I think our representatives should represent us. They shouldn't be telling us what to do, and I think that's.
Well, and of course, for me now with
that means
this
being
file,
accessible,
this
right?
file, all of a sudden, I know a lot more about mining than I ever thought I would know as a lowly family physician. But the informed prior consent, the idea that in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that they must be meaningfully consulted on everything, and we're now receiving all kinds of legislation that they weren't even asked about.
And there's so many nations and so many different voices with different interests that hearing and consulting with people is such a huge job. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think that should be taken much more seriously by
Well,
the
Jane Jacobs
federal
always
government.
said that great policymakers, decision makers can see in their mind's eye the people affected. And I found that as a family doctor, it was really interesting that most of what I did for my first few years in Parliament, I had sort of seen in my office, whether it was sitting on the Joint Committee on Changes to the Divorce Act, that you knew that this had to be about the kids, not the rights of the parents. The parents have responsibilities, the kids have the rights. And that there were, a woman trying to get a business loan, or all of the various things that you had seen, as patients in your office. And I think that's why consultation really matters, to hear the stories of things that aren't fair. But also we're going to try, I'm going to try and put forth a private member's bill that would detail what meaningful consultation was as a minimum specification, but also with a special description of what it means for Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, Métis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And so now I just have a couple kind of more personal questions, like what's the most challenging thing for you about being a politician? Now, I can guess what some of them might be, just having the public profile and having everything out there to be questioned and argued with, but I want to actually hear from you, like what you think is difficult about being a politician. Well,
you had mentioned the hours. That's nothing. I mean, I used to, I delivered 2,000 babies, so I sleep through the night in this new job, and that is really a piece. And I've been well prepared. I can sleep on aircraft. I can sleep on a clothesline. So it's meaning that the bionic necessity of this job is really not true. So it's a bit of a sprint and collapse. I think what's hard. And the thing that I have the most difficulty helping prepare female candidates is that we're now into an era where people are actually lying. It used to be just spin, and I would, say, this is a mug or something, and they'd say, well, it doesn't hold water, and I'd say, but you're holding it upside down. I mean, the spin was being able to put something, you say, well, it's too hot. You say, well, there's this handle here, right? I mean, it's sort of, there was a way of putting the facts in the best possible light for you, is what spin is. But to say there's no cup there, which is what's happening on the Kelowna Accord, or, you know, you're going, well, it's Whoppers is what I'm having trouble with, in that I didn't like Whoppers from my kids, from my students, from my patients, that if somebody's not going to tell you the truth, then what on earth are you going to do? And so I wrote this piece in the Toronto Star in 2007 called Confessions of a Heckler, where I sort of blame June Callwood of, you know, if you're an observer to an injustice, you are indeed a participant. And I've decided my heckling will be reserved for Whoppers. In that to sit there saying nothing when the minister is just making stuff up is hard. Yeah. Do you think? And,
no,
and the journalism students,
yeah.
Emily, I always tell them to go home and rent Amazing Grace, and you will see Wilbur Force being unmercifully heckled for this bizarre idea of getting rid of slavery, right? So it's this idea of that there was decorum in the house ever, you know, is a bit of a fantasy. I think we could do better, and I think it used to be about the issues. Now it is a personal. It's lay off the coffee, Carolyn, take a Valium. You know, when I was talking about the vaccine for pregnant women, you're the only one who's confused, and it's actually coming from ministers.
Really? Okay. So, well, it's sort of like you're perpetually living in a reality show.
Yeah. And there's a few I'd like to vote off the island.
So flip it around. What's the best thing? What's your favorite part of the job?
I think well, there's two parts to it. Obviously, I think this democracy thing's pretty important. So to actually be there in a grade 5 classroom or a grade 10 civics class and actually see people with a more human face on what is the swear word. You know, I usually start with the question, now, does anybody know what I used to do? And somebody will say that you were a doctor. I said, well, where does that fit in respect for professions, right? And it's sort of up there, you know, it's always below nurses, but it's up there. And now what I do is down with, you know, used car salesmen and telemarketers. Why would it? Yeah, and I go, why would anybody do that? And so then they start to ask about that. But I mean, I think it's a joy actually to be able to think that you're out there one by one turning people around, that they've got to actually get involved in this thing called their democracy and pay attention, and that they can't take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally it's
it is
seeing your fingerprints on something that actually changed,
right.
And that, you know, if it hadn't been for you, like I had lunch with the amazing Janet Smiley last week, who's just won the Aboriginal Achievement Award. She was one of our Women's College Fellows in Women's Health, Métis physician, epidemiologist. And she said to me, but if it hadn't been for you, the Indigenous Physicians Association would have gone under. Well, that's something I totally forgotten. Or things like the disability tax credit for people with mental illness, and how it was never dealing well with people who were good and then not so well, and things like, even though, you know, fighting for the victims of Hep C or tobacco, I mean, that, you know, there are a number of things that, even, you know, setting up the public health agency, that you know that you were trying to do it right. And in the public health agency, it still says what I wrote, which is that we wanted to put the public back into public health.
Right. So even if it didn't go the way you wanted, you tried your hardest to change something.
And sometimes stopping something that's bad, you know, is sometimes done very quietly behind the scenes, but you know that if you hadn't been there fighting against it.
Yeah. no one would have registered dissent.
Right.
Right, exactly. So do you want to talk at all about the renewal of the Liberal Party, or do we want to open it up to questions?
No, no, let's have questions.
Yeah, guys.
The party's going to have to
come ask some
do what it
questions.
does. That's right.
Come up to the microphone here because we do record these sessions and we'll probably put them online.
And actually, all both to test the microphone and to ask that question. I am actually curious in the renewal of the Liberal Party and within the context of campaign school, what you would like to see in not so much a utopian, but an optimistic, that the role that a leadership contest can and should play in transforming a party, especially in terms of more diverse participation and more grassroots and rank and file participation in the party as a whole.
Because I think that there's, I mean, as you know, in our party, we put off the leadership contest just because people like me particularly, and I was worried the last time when we lost in 2008, that was the reason that I pushed hard that we have a change commission, because I felt that if people scampered back into their leadership camps, that no one was actually really working on changing the way the party was needing to rebuild itself riding by riding by riding. And so in the bottom-upness and the health of riding associations and the way that, you know, in terms of Ursula Franklin's sort of definition of good governance, being fair, transparent, takes people seriously, and that if we don't do that in our small organizations, why would anybody think we would govern that way? That we actually had a lot of work to do. I wanted to call the Change Commission report the Stop Rewarding Bad Behavior, you know, because somehow in organizations, the bullies or the consensus in Canada too often has been whoever speaks loudest and last wins, and I felt that within our party we had to do a much more authentic job at getting the members a voice and making them feel that what they have to say really matters. And even dumb things like a balanced scorecard for riding associations, and does the riding association reflect the diversity of that riding? That, you know, when single interest groups can take over a riding association, or the tribal warfare of certain groups think that they own the riding, that when they're 10% of the riding, that we actually need to when we look around the executive, does this reflect the community that we're in? And I think that's one of the most important jobs we've got to do now, as well as getting more women. We've only got 18% riding presidents are women, you know, and it's not surprising it's 17% in our caucus. That I really like what Equal Voice has done on the women's thing around be her or support her, that we've got to do them. Not everybody wants to be on a ballot, but everybody should understand that their skills of organizing, fundraising, policy, communications can be utilized to help the candidate of their choice. And I think that's the other piece, that it's not just about finding candidates, it's wrapping great candidates with a team that feels they're contributing, and not everything's coming from somewhere else, you know, telling them to do things that they just know won't work in their riding. Yeah.
I think, Carolyn, you're doing a great job at bridging the gap between democracy and politics, and it's an interest of mine on how our system can be changed, and I wondered if you had ideas about how to make the system systemically bridge that gap so that politicians aren't there all the time talking about the people, and then they go back and they do their job and it's all about the corporation and the corporate interest, because people can't keep up the lobby all the time because they have lives to live, yet corporations can because they can afford to buy the lobby. And that's a big problem in our society, in my mind, because the people's interests get lost in that process, and you've probably seen it working in the Aboriginal community and working all over in your jobs. I wonder if you have any comments on how you could make a change to the system to make that work better.
One of the things we've done properly in Canada that we still need to be grateful for is not only banning corporate donations, but what McCain wanted to do, how many ever presidential campaigns again, the election financing piece is huge, right? I can only spend about $80,000 in an election. I can raise that without very much trouble at all. And if the pesticide guy, you know, I mean, now that there's no corporate donations, but the president of the pesticide company doesn't like the way I voted, I don't really care. I will go and get money from somebody else next time, and it's not hard. When you have congressmen and senators in the United States spending more than 50% of every week fundraising, and needing millions and millions of dollars, then they really do end up having to worry about pissing off a whole segment of their donors or where their funds are coming from. So I think on that, we're doing better than the states, and I think that we probably hold off the corporations on things that are quite clear. Where I think we don't have is the think tank solution machine building what would be the alternatives. I mean, I think that the alternative policy group, that develops the alternative budget and those things, I think they do quite a reasonable job. But when you think of the kind of, that's it, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, yeah, and Armin Alnigin and all of those great people. But if you think of what we're up against here as well, and there's a professor at University of Ottawa who talks about, the policy capacity to find the solutions. That on the progressive side, we spend all our time trying to prove that poor people don't live as long. Well, you know what? We know that. We just don't know what to do about it. And at the moment, we haven't been able to communicate even early learning and childcare and the importance of that, or education, or those things. On the right-hand side, though, you've got all these think tanks that actually aren't thinking at all. They are persuasion machines. And that's what, in my first election, to see people on welfare voting for Mike Harris, and you go, what are they doing? And it was because they were talking about welfare fraud, and the lady across the hall, boyfriend comes too often, and she shouldn't have the single thing. And they thought that that welfare fraud was going to be the issue, not that they were eventually going to come and cut all welfare payments. And so, and I think what we've just seen here with Rob Ford, that having, a real comm shop that can have people disengage their brain, disengage their heart, and vote with their gut. In terms of stop the gravy train or whatever, what are the words that you can use that will piss people off enough to vote your way, rather than in their best interest in terms of policy? So I think it's how also the money talks on the communication side. And when we realize that this government's firing all the scientists, all the accountants, and just hiring more and more comms people, you think this is really what this is about. It's what Ursula says. This isn't actually a government we have now. It's an administration in campaign mode at all times. And that what also happened in this last election, as you start to read the Stealing Democracy websites and the voter suppression stuff, that you start to see that if the cynicism continues to rise about politics and politicians and all government bad, all politicians bad, pox on all their houses, you get caught doing anything, oh, everybody did that. What does it matter if you vote? They're all just as bad as one another. Compound it with negative advertising. You can watch the...
It's actually very hard not to feel that way when so many politicians aren't accessible. You don't feel like you can tell them what you want and what's important to you, that it is coming from top down. So I think it's hard to fight that inside yourself, that feeling that it doesn't matter.
And therefore, people stay home on election day, and then there's this disproportionate influence of the right. And because the right never wants women to vote, immigrants to vote, tenants to vote, Aboriginals to vote. If all those people will stay home, thank you very much, then they will win. And I mean, even in the petrol, you know, the Alberta, you know, their voter turnouts at 48% because people have just given up. That doesn't mean there aren't progressive thinkers out there. It's that they've been persuaded their voice doesn't matter, and what's it all worth it? So
I mean, all the information that we get goes through a right-wing media machine. Like there's very little left-wing or even middle-of-the-road media left anymore. It's all right-wing in my opinion.
And I think that we are going to.
We all, sorry to interrupt. We're all on Twitter now.
Well, I think that's exactly what I was going to say. That we will end up with it disintermediated, right? Because no one really west of here reads the Globe and Mail, and that's probably the, you know, I mean, it's the local media, and that this government has decided to infiltrate all of those local little baby newspapers that are so well read.
Let's go to the next. Let's try to get through a few questions here. So, yeah.
Hey, I just have a quick question. You were talking about the permanent campaign earlier. Last year around this time, you were a critic of a minority government. Right now, you're a critic of a majority government. I'm wondering if there's a difference in approach that you found when you don't, you know, there's not an election likely to bubble up in the next couple.
Well, I mean, that's why I think it's really exciting to have this file of Aboriginal. So there's two things. One is knowing you've got 3 years plus to build what you would want to see should you be fortunate enough to find to form a government. So it's not exactly building a platform, but it is building, whereas in a minority you're just building a platform all the time and going and it's sort of timbits, you know. I mean, whereas I hope that we're building something substantial. I think we're trying to do a better job getting the facts out. So this evidence-based policy stuff, and I think we are bad that we just move all over the place, but evidence versus ideology, I think we are going to continue to hammer as much as we can. But one of the things that, you know, next week Stéphane Dion on Sunday afternoon will come, and I think we've also got to prepare the field for some understanding of the need for proportional representation. Right. 60% of the people did not vote for these guys. Yep. And we've got to do a bit of a curriculum on this over the next little while, where we can get ready to prepare people, and a little bit of a history lesson about René Lévesque being elected when more people voted Federalist and we got a separatist majority in Quebec. That there are a number of things that we've got to remind people how unfair this system is before we start confusing them with MMP, STV, blah, 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 alphabet soup, and fighting amongst the progressives as to what would be the better system. Let's just get everybody understanding how unfair this is, right, that these jerks can just do anything they want with 40% of the vote.
1 sec, we've got
20%. Yes.
20% of the vote.
Yeah.
Come on up.
Hi. Good afternoon. I wouldn't expect you to remember me, but I've sat in on some meetings at the Liberal Party, I guess, conventions with you and some of the other women, including Hetty Fry, etc. When I was Toronto Danforth Liberal Policy Chair under Dennis Mills.
Under Dennis,
I wouldn't expect you to remember, but my question sort of, I remember in that meeting, I believe there was Sheila Copps and Jean Augustine along with Hetty Fry, and it's just, it's not so much by way of comment, but I'm concerned that the party still hasn't really, and we touched on the idea of consultation, hasn't really healed in terms of what happened to all of those great grassroots women and visible minorities, and just great thinkers in general, whatever race, class, color, etc., who were just stepped over and sidestepped and pushed aside by the party. And a lot of us, younger people at the time who were interested in making changes through the Liberal Party, have really just lost, I wouldn't say interest, we still look to the party and are interested, but we're concerned that, that it really isn't a party that has sort of, I wouldn't say make amends, but sort of come to terms with what were the failings of the system in terms of the party. It became a situation. It happens from, as you indicated earlier, the grassroots level in terms of the riding association, where a certain interested group, which really doesn't reflect the whole riding, hijacks the party, and the nomination system is fraught with difficulties. And we've had just a recent situation with that, and people who are actually interested in political change and policy changes. I'm grateful to have been at the convention the year that we agreed to pass a resolution for compassionate care. That's sort of something I look back at, and I'm very thankful that I was one of the many people across the country who felt that was a policy that should be instituted in the Employment Standards Act, et cetera, so that people could leave and care for ailing family members who were either terminal or fairly gravely ill. So it's that kind of thing that I'm interested in, and would like to be, if there is an invitation extended to others who really do want to work to rebuild the party. It's that kind of thing that I'd like to be to participate
no, and
in.
I'll
but
take that back. I know that Maria Minna is trying to put together what the old Toronto and District, where people would be cooperating across, not just riding by riding, but that there would be regular meetings where people could come together to discuss an idea or that kind of thing. So stay tuned. We're also going to put, at this past convention, one of the most successful items in the program was an idea that we'd come up with on the policy committee calls around Critics Corner. And so I did a Critics Corner on Aboriginal issues with Cynthia, and anybody who was interested came to that meeting. We're going to put it up online so that there'll be a Critics Corner online and on the various policies. So I think organizationally we're going to need the people to come together and feel that they've been heard locally, but also that they also have a way of influencing the critic, ideas for question period, those kinds of things, but and then an online chat once a month with each of the critics, so that we're gonna, I think, try.
That way, people can actually respond to what the policies are.
But I think that you're quite right. That was a very ugly period in our party, where people just felt that they were, that the juggernaut was sort of crushing people, and I think we are healing now, finally.
Well, have people been invited back?
I think so. I think that there's now an overture. I think riding by riding to all past members, and I think you'll start to see that. I mean, if people's emails have changed or addresses have changed, then it's going to be tougher. But I think there is this overture of, the sort of like homecoming, but also the prospecting of people who ought to be liberals. Homeless progressive conservatives, the many Greens that don't feel that they're being listened to. There's the NDP that are also feeling not listened to. So we're gonna try and be the place where people will, because Bob Ray has set such a standard of actually caring about what people have to say.
Yeah. Okay.
So please, come out next Sunday afternoon. with on PR with Stéphane Dion, Dave Meslin. Yeah.
Okay. So the last election had left both opposition parties in considerable disarray at the moment. And frankly, right now, with the NDP, the official opposition is essentially leaderless, and Bob Rae is just an interim leader for the time being. And frankly, Stephen Harper and his Conservatives are taking full advantage of that to ride roughshod over any and all opposition in the House of Commons. How long, or to what extent, any kind of timetable into how long before we can see things resolve themselves?
Well, I think that we're, as liberals, I mean, the NDP, there'll be the by-election, March 19th, and then there'll be the NDP leadership convention, and then we will continue to go. I think that it seems that the docile sort of robots on the other side of, just doing as they're told and muted, gaffer's tape over their mouths are starting to wake up a little bit. I think Stephen Harper had a pretty ugly caucus meeting on the OAS changes. So I think we're gonna start to hopefully see them squirming a fair bit. That the top-down doesn't work. I mean, it's one thing for us as parliamentarians not to have been consulted, but it sounds like he hadn't even consulted his own caucus on this stuff. And then you start to see a bit of the beginnings of a rebellion. But I think we also feel that we can't just wait for them to destroy themselves, that we've actually got to be building something real to put in the window that is values driven and where people feel that we understand that they're working harder and harder to stay in the same place, that there's lots of feelings that are that need to be tapped into as to really some of the I mean, even on the climate change, we played Kyoto beach ball yesterday because we had no ice at the Witchwood Barns because we've had no winter, and so. I think we are also going to have to, and Bob Rae's been very good.
It's kind of a good reason to get action on that whole
and so
issue.
I think that we feel that Bob Rae has this lovely combination of a sense of humor when you need it, so you're not shaking your finger at everybody all the time, but also calling things out when they need to be. So I think that we'll start to see Canadians paying attention and. They don't really want to be embarrassed anymore by this government.
We have 4 people in line there. If anybody wants to run and get in. Oh, is there a question from Idle?
Yeah, we have 5 if you count the virtual.
Okay.
We'll ask the virtual one?
Yeah, let's ask Idle.
Question, which is it's a little long, so I'll read it out, and if you need me to repeat, let me know. Her question is about communication. Without a focused and consistent message, any political party is stuck. In my opinion, Idle's opinion, this is what cost the Liberals in the last election. Their inability to clearly frame what values they stood for. For example, Ignatieff kept using the language of the Tories, their framing and just arguing against it. He lost because all he did was reinforce their frame with the Jets and jail slogan. Given that the voters vote with their identity and values, even when it goes against their self-interest, and that the truth alone will not set us free, what is the Liberal Party doing to frame the debate, besides tell us that Harper is a bad man? And is there an idea crisis on the side of progressives in Canada?
Just before you answer, Idle is interested in running for city council. And she's a young woman, yeah. And she's the reason we have campaign school, because it was her idea originally to create a forum for people to talk to each other and learn from each other about the process. So
that's great. Well, and if she wants to come have a coffee anytime, I will be more than happy to do a sort of whatever. we had a few before the last municipal election that sort of we would come and we would have breakfast or something every so often. I think she's absolutely right. It's you know, that everything that we want to do on the progressive side underlines the fact that we think there aren't simple solutions to complex problems. We think there are complex solutions to complex problems. And so everything we want to say takes a paragraph, and everything they want to say fits on a bumper sticker or you know, a 7-second soundbite. And so, you know, on you know, young offenders, we want to start with early learning and childcare, and we want to do the whole literacy. I mean, we sort of do this wide-ranging preamble, while they're going more cops, more prisons, less taxes, and we've got to figure it out. I think the Grant Gordon's campaign in Toronto Danforth is spectacular in terms of how he has used humor, but also some biting truths to actually cut through some of this. And so I hope that we're gonna. I hope he'll be in our caucus and he'll help us with the communication plan, because, you know, I think that's what I said. I think on the other, you know, at the nomination meeting, that to the media, that we always think we've got the best policies. We just don't seem to be able to communicate them worth a damn. So we're gonna try and you know, room for improvement, and we'd love your help.
And it'll did reply to the offer for coffee then. It's a date.
Okay, okay, excellent.
Okay, so we have like 10 minutes, 9 minutes, and we have 4 people in line here, so let's just try to ask questions. Yeah, we can go a little bit longer, but try to get to your questions fairly quickly if you can.
Okay. So, being campaign school, I'm going to ask you something specifically relating to how you campaign. I personally am quite interested in politics. I've done a lot of grassroots work with different organizations, and both the NDP and the Liberals, actually. And just because I lean that way for both of them, depending on the riding, I'll help either one. But I'm kind of torn about entering politics myself. Like, I personally am a very honest person. I generally express myself fairly well, and I think, and I've done the whole like president of the student council thing and all that, you know, and I like coming up with ideas. But about actually entering politics in this partisan system, I'm not too sure if I can handle that, because I understand that you have strings attached to you, no offense, but you know what I mean? Like, there are strings. Remember you were talking about like having the parents look over you, or the little kids, or whatever it was, right? Because you were having free reign in talking to people. But that, for me, kind of undermines democracy, right? And the fact that new ideas are somehow, unless it is exactly in line with the communication strategy of the party, can sometimes be put to the wayside, and therefore sometimes progress is not achieved. And we're just going through with seeing policies that are, you know, neat little policies, but it doesn't affect the structure of the system, and therefore, democratically speaking, we're stuck with this undemocratic government, you know, and it's all due to the partisan politics. I'm wondering, how do you deal with having these strings, with these constraints, with having to argue for something that maybe you personally don't even believe in, let's say?
And can I add, last time we had the MP for this area, Andrew Cash, in at campaign school, and questions came up around how do you go from a career in something like the arts to a career in politics when you may have, you know, been very vocal and not have listened, or, you know, in your head to these kinds of things.
I think I don't see it any differently as sitting on a board, right? Where you give it your best fight in the room, but then the board takes a decision, and you have to go outside the room, either unanimous with the board or quit, right? I mean, and one of our biggest powers is to walk away, to just say, I don't have to do this, it's very rare you get to that point. But this party discipline, quite often, isn't really party discipline, it's career discipline. On that other side, to see some of those people who know better high-fiving on the asbestos vote and on the gun control vote and all of this, it's actually trying to get into cabinet. It's just one big, long audition to end up in cabinet. And that's what I think party discipline, why it looks so awful from the outside. Has this person just lost all their brains or their smarts? What is going on? But I think if you strip it away and see really what's going on, that there, when 40 of us opposed the Endangered Species Bill, and again, I have many, many examples of all of Women's Caucus, Karen Kraft Sloan, Charles Katcha, everybody said we can't have a bill that doesn't protect habitat. 40 of us decided we were not going to move. I did a town hall meeting. They said, Carolyn, you can't support anything without protecting habitat. And it took about almost a year for the minister and the prime minister to agree to amend the bill and persuade them that the ranchers weren't going to be all that mad about, tearing up a nest by accident or whatever their paranoia was. And that we were able to stand proudly in our place and vote for the better bill, as opposed to, standing up and voting against your party. So I think we've got to do a better job explaining that when you get this is a team sport, and if I can get all Women's Caucus thinking one way and then add Atlantic Caucus and add somebody else, that we can actually change the party rules about these things, and that's why. And then there's lots of areas where the party's not made up its mind yet, and it is wavering. And so we now, thankfully, in getting our shit together, now have a legislative committee meeting every Tuesday night with the bills coming before. And anybody who wants to participate in what our stance should be for or against a bill, or want to introduce a private member's bill, that we try and make that decision as a group.
Well, what if the bill, though, is supported by the party, but then it would actually go against, let's say, the riding of one of the specific MPs?
Well, that's what used to be the three-line whip. So, the three-line whip is something that was in your friggin' brochure when you ran. It's very, that's very dumb to vote against that, right? A two-line whip this is what the party policy should be. But if it's going to be to take salt off the roads and the Windsor salt factories in your riding, then obviously they're going to let you vote whatever it is, and then free votes are free votes. What the government was doing before was, because we're so friggin' democratic as a party, they were bringing in all these egregious things as private members' bills, knowing that we would be in total disarray because we don't whip private members' bills. And so it was a strategy of theirs that absolutely worked, because it was government policy. They were just preying upon our free vote on private members' bill policy instead of actually admitting it was a government bill.
Yeah, we have 3 more people patiently waiting.
I'm interested in what you were talking about before in terms of the consultation process, and that being a centerpiece in terms of democracy. So I have a broad question and a specific question. The broad question is, you are a party in opposition. And if you really put your energy behind doing consultations and bringing people in to speak and really hearing what people are saying, how do you then bring those voices into the parliamentary process? Because you do have, a party in power that I don't even think at this point pays lip service to the whole idea of consultation. So how would you do that?
Well, I think it's something that I struggle with, because, of course, for a decade I've been on about this citizen engagement, democracy between elections. I think what I'm now interested in is some sort of min-specs of what is meaningful consultation, and being able to understand that that's different from government to parliament. So we lost the last election, for many reasons, but it's very hard to prove contempt when people don't even know the difference between government and parliament, right? Or that the Commons is to hold the government to account. So if the government's out consulting on things like, my public health agency did on the Quarantine Act or whatever, that's the a how question, really. How would you implement it? In what kind of country you want to have? Those are the kinds of questions that we should be consulting Canadians on. And then the bureaucracy should be out consulting on the how question. And so I did a little PowerPoint 2 weeks ago for a conference that was asking these questions about meaningful consultation. And I think I would like us to see, like the Faculty Association UBC said to me, I've not been consulted till I say I've been consulted, right? And that's, and as you know, even in Switzerland, on referenda, that they would never dream of doing one in less than 4 years. And that's the reason we're getting nowhere on PR, because we think, or how a proposition in California can go wacky because it's only 6 months, right? So we have to decide to have these big conversations with Canadians about things that where there's facts put out and for and against. In Chile, the reason I love the Library of Parliament work that I've done is there's these librarians of Parliament from around the world that do amazing stuff. In Chile, they hire actors to do radio spots about any new bill coming up. Somebody who's for it, somebody who's against it, and it's like a water cooler conversation that even if people can't read the bill, they at least are involved in some of the issues around it. So I think we've got to be much more creative, and we have to, if less than 3% of Canadians belong to a political party, we better bloody well treat them properly in listening to their ideas, and then we can hopefully move on to creating mechanisms. When I chaired the Disability Committee of Parliament, we had an online consultation on the future of CPP disability. We had a issue poll, tell us your story, present your solutions, and then that's 10 years ago. Nothing's happened since. There's no budget for this or whatever. But then the neat people we'd met online, we then brought back together to 2 video conferences to share with them the draft report to see if what they felt that we captured what they were needing in going forward. And I think this other piece is the feedback loops that we're not doing. That even when I've heard somebody, and by the time it ends up in the report, I've forgotten who told me that, right? I mean, there's this forgetfulness that even on the Divorce Act, I had these great people telling me it's about education, it's about resources, it's about, and they could see from my questions at committee that I'd listened to them, but we don't do that next step of saying, look, here's your great idea in the final report. Or like Romano did, where there's those quotes out in the margin when it's written up, that you end up seeing real citizens having, shaped the policy.
Good qualitative research in terms of evidence-based policy.
Yeah.
The other one is much more specific, and that is, I really believe that housing is a human right. And what I'm noticing in terms of the north of Canada and the Aboriginal people in the north of Canada, that right is not going far enough. Is the best way. I mean, I'm being very gentle. Are there consultations happening now with the people in the far north in terms of what they would want for housing, instead of, the government gives us, right? So that's the last part.
That's a very good question. And I was over at Christian Island near our cottage in the summer, and I was watching. They were starting to build some 6-plexes and things that are much more reflective of an extended family. And I think we've got to listen much better about. This is a big cold country. Even why isn't the health center in the school, and why isn't there's a number of real design elements that I think would be much better if we actually followed function.
Hi.
Hi.
I was interested in your comments, your distinction between democracy and politics. How you know, people get involved at the grassroots level, caring about an issue and following it through, and how it led you into politics. But I see these days an explosion kind of grassroots democracy. You know, we've got the Occupy, we've got issues. People are very quick to mobilize about certain issues in the city and whatever. And I don't necessarily see that translating that energy into the political system. And you know, what is it that's preventing people from, particularly young people? Are they seeing? Are the political parties at this point an anachronism that are they seen as, you know, in the age of Twitter and everything? Are they an anachronism? Is it something too old-fashioned for future generations to grab onto, or is there some other way that we can do this?
Well, I've watched some consensus governments where there's no political parties in the north, and oh my God, they're brutal. If anybody thinks that that's nice, it's awful. There's two parties, the cabinet and not in cabinet, and the not in cabinet people are accusing the cabinet of corruption and doing all these things because, you know, this budget doesn't have anything for my riding, even though I got the beautiful birthing center last year. I didn't get anything this term, therefore they're all awful and they're all whatever. I think the political parties is in Northern Ireland, you know, where everything was done by religion, a lot of those guys had a lot of time in prison to think this through, and I remember one of them, the Progressive Ulster Party or whatever, said to me something along the lines of that even though it's not left, not right, but forward is what we're trying to say as liberals, that there is something about explaining to people that if I'm in a room full of liberals, I'm more likely to agree with most of what's going on. If I'm in a room full of conservatives, which happens occasionally, I feel extraordinarily uncomfortable. like you're going to have a panic attack or something. It is just like the organic chemistry of like dissolves like, and are a few things that we agree on more things than we disagree or something. So, but we've got to make it accessible to the 97%
and that's
who just think we're irrelevant.
Yeah. That's what's so important about the openness of your policies and your desire to speak up and speak out about issues, because then people can actually respond to you, and it goes back to the open governance issues we were talking about earlier.
I think that's exactly it. If there were more
I think more people would see themselves represented in the process if they felt their voices were heard.
Not these career politicians. I think they turn a lot of people off, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, I've been doing this 15 years now. I was only a doctor for 20 years, so, you know, it's
You're not one of them, are you?
But I'm definitely not a career politician. That's right. But it is, I think this business of what you're saying is the detoxifying this idea of politics and politicians.
Is it possible?
Is it possible? And I remember during one election, they were saying about all politicians, blah blah blah, you know, and somebody wrote back in about the article and said, "Are you talking about Carolyn Bennett? Are you talking about Ken Dryden? Are you talking about who exactly are you referring to when you're going all politicians?" And so I think that those sort of generalizations are also really driving the cynicism up and the voter turnout down, because it just
we need better people in, and better people won't be drawn in until the system starts to look better. So it's the cart before the horse. Yeah.
We need a system in which great people will run, and will think that this is a calling, right?
Let's hope.
That's why we're here. We want, you know.
It's true, that's why we're all here. So, John, last question.
Good afternoon, Caroline. Great to see you here. Having seen you lots and lots of times at many things, the one thing that is paramount is you. Your energy and your honesty and your belief and your direction. And you're very good at just whatever's really relevant, bring it out and being honest about it. Having said that, you were talking about Indigenous things. Something with the Picton inquiry, and there's a request through the United Nations, I believe, you probably know about that, a lot of people might not, to actually do an inquiry on the RCMP, but people don't know that it needs the permission of the government to do it. So I think this is something we all need to be really aware of, so we can lobby all the politicians to say, we must have this as a UN inquiry. So I'm throwing that out for everybody to know.
Yeah, I wrote to CEDAW and the FAFI and a lot of the feminist groups, the Aboriginal groups, Native Women's Association are all very grateful for my letter. I think Hetty Fry's sending a letter as well this week because she chaired the committee of Status of Women's Committee of Parliament, and so we're going to try and get, you know, well, I mean, look at all of the UN inquiries that are wanting to come to Canada now. No wonder this government hates the UN. I mean, it's you know, from, you know, I wrote to the special rapporteur on Attawapiskat, you know, on housing. We've got the racial discrimination one. We've got obviously the kids, the Aboriginal or First Nations children on housing and on child welfare, and that going to the Supreme Court. So in some ways, the question about what are we going to do in this majority government, some of what we're going to be doing is in an extra parliamentary way. It's going to be 4 years of CIA in court. It's going to be 4 years of conferences and mobilizing but also having the international light shone upon us as we explain that this isn't okay. In the Stephen Lewis, we had appointed to the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health. He wasn't able to stay the whole time, and Nick Bégin was the Canadian counselor. And we opened the WHO thing on social determinants of health in Chile, you know, in 2005, I guess. He was astounded that as minister, I would stand up and say, I understand that you guys sort of are thinking about the South and don't think you have to come to the North. You've got to come to the North and see that we have First Nations, Inuit, Métis people living in third world conditions, and that we want the commission to come and look at us as well as a minister of the Crown. And so I think, you know, there are many examples of this that we need, you know, it's what my friend Erwin Kotler calls the mobilization of shame, that we've got some work to do, and the I Am a Witness campaign, Cindy Blackstock's campaign, that this case that's going to the federal court on the discrimination against child welfare for First Nations, also education. We need, from Shannon's dream about the school in Attawapiskat, Jordan's principle, we just need these words tripping off everybody's tongue so they know.
Saying about the words, on Tuesday there's a rally out at 12:30 outside the police station on College Street for missing Indigenous women.
Yes.
Now, all men should be there because this links across the whole world. You've got the thing in Kingston, a whole lot. So this should be full of men standing up and resolving our problems with men. Just a couple of other things. There was a lady I met from Nigeria the other day who'd been here 10 years, and she said she couldn't see any difference between our Prime Minister and their Prime Minister. And you can work that out. With respect to the open government, I think it's a bit of a fallacy in this country at the moment, which you probably agree. And the problem we have is we have to re-enfranchise everybody, which then goes to democracy, education, and being at a talk the other week at Fort York, the amount that is not taught to Canadians about democracy and the way it works is really horrendous. And somehow we, at all levels of, you know, us as people and politicians, have to start those courses going on. And you were on about the lies and that just now. Well, the tar sands is all lies. That everything that Harper says about the tar sands is complete lies and misuse of words. The reason I corrected you just now, and I didn't mean to be rude, but I keep throwing this out about the numbers of the last election. It's only 20% of the population. And I feel very strongly we have to get this out to the populace to understand there's only 20% of the population that voted for him. 26.25% of the eligible voters elected for, that could vote went. And a little bit of a real left wing, well, off the wall suggestion that because they only represent 20% of the population, that means to say that the opposition actually represents 80% of the population. So in that case, the voting within Parliament should be weighted. And if you look at the figures, it comes out that Harper's government, every vote on his side should be 0.5 and the opposition should be 2.5. And that way, you end up with equality of voting rights.
I think that actually might be a good final...
Just one little, if I can just
okay,
do a little
point.
thing. Party politics, we're never going to beat Harper all the time. There's two parties or more than one, two parties on centre-left. This is about not politics. This is about greater good of the country. And I think somebody like you needs to... I know you've maybe thought about running before, but somebody like you who's honest and intellectual should be running in a position for leadership or whatever.
I tried that, but I still have a retainer from teeth grinding.
Yeah, I know, but we with a heart and a conscience have to be prepared, and we have to stop people running on ego, and they have to start running on belief. And one last quote I heard on the radio there of Britain that you might like: when you have nothing, your options are infinite, as is being proved in the Arab Spring. And I hope Canada doesn't get to this point. And do you think that there's any way that the centre-left could unite Liberals, NDP, and the Greens and the rest of us?
Well, just on, I don't think we should have, I don't think that two-party systems work. So I think we should...
No, I didn't say that. We won't get rid of Harper until there's not more than one party on the other side. That's what
But I think cooperation is different than merger. And I think that the one thing that we ought to be cooperating right now on is electoral reform and trying to get as many Canadians to understand that. So we expect all of you at our town hall next Holy Rosary, 2 o'clock next on the 19th. Yeah.
I'm deeply concerned that if you had even an aspiration or even mentioned that you wanted to run for the leadership, the teeth should be grinding. That concerns me that would be the response.
I did do it. I ran in 2006, and that's when I ended up...
No,
I've already done that.
Okay.
And I actually didn't end up with, I mean, like often happens, I ended up with a $17,000 surplus in my campaign that I gave to the Judy LaMarche Fund to actually have more women run. So I did run for leader. I didn't end up with a debt, but I will deploy my help to lots of other women now. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yep.
Is it? Okay. So as you are my representative member of Parliament, and so I'm therefore one of your constituents. I'm curious if you're going to be voting against Bill C-51 tomorrow. Do you know the bill C-51, the lawful access one? Lawful access. It's a law that...
I think it was introduced on Thursday or on Friday.
Really? Okay, but and it's already being...
The first reading. They put it,
Is
I
it?
think, on the end of Friday at night when they introduced it.
Yeah. But the papers have been writing it.
Yeah.
It's
secret.
yeah, but okay.
Yeah, surveillance.
Yeah, but well,
yeah.
it's the lawful access law that will allow the police and authorities unprecedented access into our computers and to our
Without
cell
having
phones
to
with
have
no
a
warrant,
warrant.
nothing.
Right,
It'll
right,
just
right,
be
yeah. to
access, and they're going to basically force ISP, internet service providers, and cell phone providers to provide access to our cell phones to allow triangulation of where we are at all times. It's a really messed up kind of fascist law, and I'm thinking that you should vote against it.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds pretty bad to me.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your amazing questions, and thank you, Carolyn. That was a fantastic talk, and exactly the kind of spirit we want in our campaign school.
Well, it was a joy, an absolute joy, and you know, I'll come back whenever you want.
Fantastic.
Okay.